to another old-time community organizing tactic and something you wrote about in your book.
Yeah.
And we've filmed you talking about this before, is the power of storytelling.
Yes.
And I'd really love for you to just tell a little bit of our viewers of why you think storytelling is so powerful.
Well, change has always started with stories. And one of the interesting things that happen is, you think about humans standing around or sitting around the campfire telling each other stories. This has happened since humans pretty much could build fire, like since we were able to communicate with one another. And so one of the really interesting things that happens with storytelling is we build empathy. We start to care about each other's lives when we're sharing those little pieces of daily minutia or big events or big announcements, and we care about one another, and that's what's going to lead us out of the isolation and the apathy that has been really plaguing our culture for so long. And storytelling facilitates that through a number of ways, and one of the interesting things that I see now is there's a lot of science coming out, a lot of neuroscience and kind of brain chemical science coming out, supporting this idea that storytelling does build empathy, that we're hardwired for empathy in our brains, which I think is fascinating. We have this idea that we're sort of Darwinian creatures and it's going to be dog eat dog, but our brains have particular subsets of neurons that support empathy and that create empathy. And so I think that's really interesting. And storytelling, the interesting thing about it to me also is that it can't happen in isolation. You can tell yourself all the stories you want, but for actual change to happen, we need one another to produce the results of change, to enlighten one another, to do consciousness raising work. Another old school tactic of organizing from the late 60s and 70s was consciousness raising. And in effect, that's a lot of what we're doing online when we're sharing our stories with one another.
Okay, and now to go into like a concrete example, we spent until the bill was passed, we spent basically just a little over a year covering healthcare more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And even all the way to the end, I was there for the Rules Committee meeting when they sent reconciliation to the floor. I actually remember I commented to McGovern that every one of the Democrats told a personal story.
Yes.
And not a single other Republicans had. And I remember that night I called storytelling the staple of the healthcare movement. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I do, because everyone knows someone that is pretty severely affected by the dismal state of healthcare, and everyone can share that story and empathize with that terror of potentially losing your home because you got sick. It's something very fundamental and primal, and when we hear that, if we're human anyway, we think like, God, how could that be? And so that again, that empathy that creates these bonds of trust and of action in many ways are just so critical. And even you talk about healthcare. I remember when the Stupak Amendment came up. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I saw it happen on it came across my vision on Twitter, and I was like, geez. And everyone was on Twitter on a Saturday night watching C-SPAN together and drinking and batting stuff back and forth and called this number, petition this person. And I was like, God, I know we're really nerdy political people, but it was all kinds of people who don't normally participate in that end of the political process. I know for me, I often am not involved in any of the kind of legislative process pieces. I do more cultural and social justice kind of change work. And to see, a friend of mine who's a screenwriter that lives in Park Slope was, just completely into this, and there's this many votes now, and we got to do this, and every time they do this, we all do a shot, and I thought, God, we've turned politics into, like a sporting event, and how great was that to bring people into that part of the debate and help people understand what was happening.